Hello, welcome back. This is part 2 of the Logic Pro tutorial series that I'm doing. If you haven't seen the first part, I'm B1. I run a small label called Area Recordings, and this second part of the Logic tutorial is going to look a little bit more at audio editing, creating new audio files from your edited audio. We're going to look at creating software instruments and how to use the EXS24 a little bit more in depth and how to put your own samples into it. Okay, so just as before, kick off by opening Logic. And I'm going to be using the previous template that I created, or the previous project. And as I said at the end of the last video, I'm just going to continue to build this up from scratch as we go along. So I saved the last one as tutorial part 2. So I'll click OK to open that. And this brings me back to my template project I created. So at the end of the last video, I'd put all my markers in. So I no longer need this audio file. I can delete this, and by going to my media, I can select the file and I can delete it from the whole project. Part of doing file management with the Logic projects is making sure that any audio that you've imported and not using is removed, just to make your file smaller. So the first thing I'll do now to remove that is I'll save to update the project, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to import this audio file called drums1, which you can download following the link in the description for the video. Again, I simply drag and drop this onto the arrange window. I'll go into Logic, and this is asking me if I want to import the tempo information from the file. Now in this case I'm going to select yes, and if you check out the global tempo here, you can see that the global tempo has changed. Because I've got my template and I know what tempo I want my song to be at, once I've finished editing this piece of audio, it's easier for me to just go and reset this back to 140. So I'll close the media window, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in to this audio track. I'm going to be using the scissors tool, and I'm going to quickly run through now basic audio editing and how to save the edited audio as new audio files or individual audio files. So the first thing that I want to do with this piece of audio is open it up in the sample editor. So I want to have a look at the audio that I've imported. The first thing that I can see is that the first sound, or the first hit, so if I play through it, it's just a selection of drum hits. The first hit doesn't start on the beginning of the bar. Most pieces of audio don't start on the beginning of the bar. Not all, but most, from my experience. So first thing I need to do is set my locator to the beginning of that audio file. I close the edit window, and I can see on the arrange page that it's removed this little bit of silence that would have been at the beginning. So I drag that back so it's synchronized with 1 right at the beginning of the arrangement, and it'll play through all of the hits. So from looking at it, I can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 individual hits or 12 parts of a drum kit. What I want to do is I want to separate each of these into individual parts. There's two ways to do this. I can get the scissors tool up like in the previous tutorial, and I can go along and click at the beginning of each hit. Or, because I know that they're all on quarter bar increments, if I go to here and if I press command to get my scissors up and then press alt, I can see that the scissors has a little plus sign appear. If I then click to slice, it slices every quarter and separates all the regions. If I undo that and click on the half, it'll separate them at every half. If I do it on the bar, it'll separate on every bar. It's just a little trick that you can use, and it's worth exploring. And again, this is basic audio editing. So I've now got 12 individual audio files. Some of them are varying lengths depending on the size of the hit. So to quickly preview, if I take this one here and double click, it will appear in the sample editor at the bottom. If I listen back to it, so I'm going to turn my loop off. I'll turn my loop on to Audition. I can hear that it's got quite a lot of sustained reverb on it, or the sound plays until it gets to the very end. Now, I don't want the sound to do that in this particular case. So an easy way of adjusting the length of all of these samples, note that I haven't selected the last piece of audio. I've selected the first 11, is if I move my cursor to the bottom right hand corner, I can see that it changes into like a horseshoe. If I click and drag backwards, it adjusts the length of all of the audio files I've selected. So I've adjusted the length of them by half, because the last audio file isn't a whole bar. I go and select that individually and adjust it and remove just a quarter. So the next thing I want to do with these files is I want to create brand new audio files. So when you're doing audio editing, if you apply editing to that piece of audio, if you add silence or if you normalize, it will apply it to the whole piece of audio. If you've editing, or if you're sampling a piece of music that's a whole song file, then you can end up destroying what it is that you're trying to do. So you can edit it, but edit it badly, and then you're unable to go backwards. So this is a really good method of making everything so it's individual. So if you do some editing and you can't undo, you've still got an original file you can go back to, which I'll show you. So in my audio bin, I can see here I've got my original file. By looking at the blue line, I can see that's the whole file. As I go down, if I look on the arrange window, I can see selecting each file on its own. But those files are still attached to this main file here. So by clicking on the little triangle, I've still got just one file. So any editing I do on these is applied to this. So what I'm going to do is select all of the individual pieces of audio I've edited, go to audio here and convert regions to new audio files. This will ask me where I want to save them. So I'll save them in my audio files folder, but I'll create a new folder for myself and call it drum hits. Create. I want the original sample rate, the original bit depth. I want WAV format and no change and no dither. So back in my bin, I can see that I've now got individual files for each of my hits. The next thing that we're going to look at doing in terms of editing the audio is I'm going to apply fade outs. So if I take this file here, for instance, and audition it, turn the loop off, it has a rather abrupt finish. So what I'm going to do to each file, starting at the beginning and working my way through, is select, open up the sample editor here, go to function and select fade out. Go to my next one, function, fade out. It's a little bit boring to watch. So the purpose of this is so that the file sounds natural, so it doesn't have an abrupt finish to it. Abrupt finishes are quite useful to be in a creative way when you're making something, but for the purpose of basic audio editing and getting your head around it, this is the process to follow. So I've got my last sample, I'll audition that. I go back to this one. So you can hear that it's fading, it's a lot less abrupt. So I'll get rid of that. So now I've just created a load of individual drum hits from a main audio file. The next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to use these hits to create a drum kit in a sampler. So I don't want to use an audio track anymore. I'm moving now to a software instrument, as explained in a previous tutorial. I need to create an instrument, which is done here on the input section. So I click on there. What I'm looking for is an EXS24 sampler, and I'll select a stereo version. And this is what the EXS24 looks like. You can use the tab there to make it fill your screen, to explore it a little bit. It has many functions as most samplers, and it also has the ability to play a sine wave, so it's quite good for using as a sub when you're making tunes. So with no samples in it, so I can see here with these three little dots, that tells me that there's no sounds loaded into it. That it will play just a sine wave. Ignore that little bit then, that's just my keyboard playing up. So I want to put these WAV samples into this sampler. What I need to do is I need to locate my folder for my tutorial part 2. I want audio files, drum hits, and then on Logic I want to open my sampler up. Now on here, I want to go to edit, and this will bring up the window that shows me that there's no samples in my sampler. So by pressing Command and Tab, I bring this up. It allows me to go back to my Finder, select my drum hits, and drag them onto my sampler. Now Logic gives you the option to automatically lay all the samples out, which is quite useful. And what it's telling me that it's going to do is it's going to lay them all out in order as they appear here, so from 1 to 12. It's going to start on note C1, which is generally the lowest note on your MIDI controller keyboard. I'm using a 49 key controller keyboard, so C1 is my lowest note. Whatever drum kit you open in any sampler, your first sound will always be on C1, will generally be a kick drum. And it's telling me the width is going to be 1 note long, so each note is just going to be on 1 key. So I'll press OK. So I can see that I've now got all of my samples in a sampler, and they're all 1 note long. If I wanted to change the length, it allows me to do that, which changes the pitch as well, but we'll explore that at a later date. But the basic premise of this tutorial is you've edited the drum samples, created the individual files, and got them in your sampler. What I then want to do is audition it. So using my keyboard, I've checked that it's all playing correctly. It's all on the keys that I want it to. So I want to export my sampler instrument and sample files. I don't want to save. It's always make sure that you export, and I'll show you the reason why. So I've exported it, and I'm going to call it B1 Tutorial Drum Kit, and save. Now, if I go back to my project folder here, I can see that it's created a sampler instrument folder, and inside I've got my B1 Tutorial Drum Kit, which is with all my samples in it, and then I've got my drum patch. You need both of these things in these folders, otherwise it won't work, which is why you export. If you save it, it will just save your patch, and it won't save your WAV files for you. So I can close this now, and I can see that I've got my B1 Tutorial Drum Kit. And if I click on this window, I have access to all of the sounds in the factory sound bank. These are all the presets that come with Logic. I've got a few kits that I've made and haven't saved anywhere in specific, and then I've got the project that I'm working on at the moment and the drum kit. So for example, if I swap this and just select a dry kit, for example, I decide I don't want this kit. I click back on the menu, go to Tutorial Part 2, Logic, Sampler Instrument, B1 Tutorial Drum Kit, and I've got my drums. So I can delete these audio files now. Command S to make sure I've saved my project so I don't lose anything. I can go back to my media, and I can delete all the audio files from my project because I don't need them anymore because they're saved within the sampler now. And then save to back it up. Saying that the files weren't found. Quite common. So what I'll do to double check is I'll press Alt, Command and W to close my project. Go to File, Open Recent, Tutorial Part 2, and there I've got my sampler with my drums in it. So, I hope you found that useful. There's a lot more you can do with the sampler. It's quite deep. There's quite a lot of stuff you can explore on it. But this is, as I say, it's a basic tutorial on how to edit some audio and how to get it into the sampler and get it working with the track that you're working on. So what I'll now do is, as I'm going along, I'm going to do a save as. Saving it in the same folder, the same project that I'm working in. I'm going to save this as part 3 and save, ready for the next tutorial video. It's still saying audio files not found, even though we've checked it and know they work. Gotta love computers.